Accessing agent files. Brian Sovryn. Early 21st century anarchist. Creator and host of the podcast Sovryn Tech. By the year 2021, the show would be instrumental in the downfall of various conservative ideologies in the government, helping usher in an incredible time.
Hey, want to take a walk on the wild side and experience the bleeding edge of technology? Then get ready, because it doesn't get much more edgy than this. You're in for a wild ride. You're listening to Sovryn Tech with your host, the man in triple black, the golden stallion of the tech world, Brian Sovryn. He's got a huge brain. And now here's Brian.
The Rembrandt of the podcast canvas, the golden stallion, the man of tomorrow, here for you, the libertine in chief, Rembrandt of the podcast canvas. See, now that's one I used to use a lot, very early on in the beginning of the show. And I knew there were other ones other nicknames that I'd come up with that I wasn't using much anymore. But there's one, the Rembrandt of the podcast canvas. Anyway, that's a fitting one, because what I've got here for you is a top 8. I love doing my Sovryn Tech top 8s. So a nice special here for you, because, I will be, I want to provide as much content as I can, as I will be going away or not going away that far, but we'll be at Liberty Forum 2015. And so, I want to make sure that listeners have plenty to hear about it. Now, of course, I'm sure Stephanie and I will do the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy will do a wrap-up show of Liberty Forum, how it went. Maybe that won't be as long as some of the past, but then maybe it will. I don't know. Whenever we get in front of the microphones, it seems we talk for 2 hours regardless. We still have that episode from Cancun that we recorded that we will be releasing. Well, we'll figure out how that's going to get released, but that's for the future. So anyway, but anyway, yeah, somebody's making the money sign there. Anyway, I don't know what the hell that means. It's that good. They're going to have to pay. Oh man. Anyway, Stephanie is the producer of the show. What can I say? So I got a little top 8 here for you that I wanted to go over. And as I called myself the Rembrandt of the podcast canvas, quite frankly, I am a fan of podcasts, obviously. Of course, I like to call Sovryn Tech a newscast these days more than anything. And certainly plenty of these would fall better under the newscast category, perhaps. But I want to share with you my top 8 podcasts. There are certainly lots of other podcasts that I listen to that are not on here that I like just as well. But, I've chosen the arbitrary number of 8, and I've decided to share 8 of them at least, with maybe a couple little bonuses at the end, because this is going to be ones that are presently running. They're the only ones I'm going to go over. I mean, there's plenty of podcasts that have come and gone that I really enjoyed. In fact, there used to be one. I listened to a podcast. This was before I went to the Army. I listened to a podcast. This would have been in 2001 by a guy named Chris Hanel, who he did Digital Llama Radio, I think was the name of it. And if I remember correctly, and maybe that had something to do with Winamp or whatever, but I think he was an Apple fanboy at the time, which so was I. So yeah, anyway. So Digital Llama Radio, it was like a Star Wars / geek podcast before podcasting was even a thing. And Chris Hanel actually helped he made a movie called The Force or something like that. It was like, if you remember Free Enterprise, the movie Free Enterprise, not the concept, but the movie Free Enterprise, where it was like, a bunch of, nerds getting together, and just their lives as nerds, and dealing with falling in love and all this stuff. This was a very similar movie, and it's terrible. I can't think of the damn name of the thing. So I know I have a copy of it somewhere, but it used to be when the Force.net was showing off Star Wars fan films. This was one of them, but it wasn't something that actually took place, like where they were pretending it to be Star Wars. They were doing more of a Free Enterprise where it was about fans of Star Wars, and really ahead of its time. And it's still a great flick. to watch. It's terrible that I can't think of the damn name. So anyway, Chris Hanel did that. That was like the first podcast I ever listened to. Obviously that only went a few episodes, and is still not around, but way, way ahead of its time. So I've been enjoying podcasts for a really long time is the whole point that I want to share with you. So let's get into this. Now, these have varied topics. They are not anarchist particularly. They are not even technology particularly. This is just a top 8 of podcasts that I still listen to, that I enjoy, that are pretty much must downloads, where I want to listen to them every week. And when I use Pocket Casts on my Android phone for my podcatching. On my computer, I'll use Gpodder, which is a great cross-platform option for that, to check stuff out. And none of these listed are particularly, like, there's ones that I love, like Hack 5. That's HAK5 by Darren Kitchen and Snubs. Or Shannon Morse. I really enjoy Hack 5, but that you cannot just listen to Hack 5. It is a video, podcast, for lack of a better phrase. And so none of these are that. These are all ones that you can just listen to. Maybe some of them have video and it might make it a little bit better if you do watch the video, but you can easily get by just listening to them, because when I listen to them in Pocket Casts, I listen to them at 2x speed, generally, unless they're talking about a really fine point subject. And, I really, really need to be catching the details. Then I'll listen to it, 1.5 or 1.3. Or something. So, funny thing about that, while we're talking about podcasts here, when I finally say the offhand chance happens, like I want to watch something on Twit, which is Twit is Leo Laporte's network, arguably the biggest podcast network and the most, really, most well done, certainly. And also, the most successful as far as, even money wise and whatever else. They do really, really well for themselves. They do better than some television networks, than probably most television networks. Maybe I'm catching it online or I'm watching it live. Sometimes I like to catch Twit live on Sundays, the actual show, This Week in Tech. And God, everybody talks so slow. It's kind of weird, but I know in years past when I've listened to Leo Laporte, he sounded totally normal, but now everything just sounds slow when you get used to listening to everything at 2x. And in fact, let me know if you listen to my show in 2x. I'm curious what I sound like in that. I've done it before, and I feel kind of bad about this, because on the one end, I want to get the information in, and that's the end of it. But on the other, myself, I have a presentation style that I like to deliver with, pregnant pauses and all this stuff. And as they're called pregnant pauses. And so I would feel that listening to me in 2x would kind of kill that presentation. Now, most of the shows I listen to, I don't think, rely on that kind of presentation style so much. And the only other guy I can think of that has a presentation style is like Chris Jericho with Talk is Jericho. But yeah, I wonder if that kind of ruins things. I don't know. You can email me, Brian@ZomiOfflineGames.com if you do happen to do that, and if that affects anything at all. But anyway, whatever. Here I am complaining that people might not be listening to my style, and yet I wouldn't give anyone else really the time of day for that. So who am I to complain, right? Anyway, let's get right into this. I don't want to spend too much time on this one, but this is our top 8 podcasts that are running. They're out there. They don't require video, and they cover a broad range of topics. So number 1, we mentioned Twit. So why don't we break right into this? Number 1 is actually Security Now, and Security Now that's a show that's been running, I think, almost 10 years, and as some shows on the Twit network, that's at twit.tv, have been. And, just had a glass of water there. And Steve Gibson and Leo Laporte co-host, the show. And Steve Gibson is just brilliant. He is an absolute hero of mine. I love the man. He's great. They call him the explainer in chief, which may be where, even though I didn't come up with the Libertine in Chief, that was a nickname that a listener gave to me. Maybe that's kind of where that came from, is that, Steve Gibson's the explainer in chief. The Golden Stallion, Brian Sovryn, is the Libertine in Chief. And so, but he explains, in as simple language as is possible, and sometimes it's not that possible, what is going on in the realm of security and a lot of tech developments in general that have to do with networking, and not even, networking. And, Steve Gibson's just been around for so long. I don't know if he's in his 60s now or not, I imagine, but maybe he isn't. But he's been around for so long. I mean, he's seen really the internet from the beginning in many ways. This is a guy that's gotten job offers from DARPA, from the NSA, from others, and he generally turns them down. He's not an anarchist, but he certainly believes in freedom, I think, in many ways. And, he just, the topics he covers, I mean, he does it in such a great job of it. And there's so much information to soak in, even if you're not a security-minded, person, or like even necessarily a tech-minded person, I think it's a great show to listen to. In fact, they've even gotten emails in the past about it that some people just like the rapport between Leo Laporte and, and Steve Gibson, that they just enjoy listening to the show. And Steve Gibson oftentimes will bring up science fiction too. In fact, full disclosure, there's some things that I feel Sovryn Tech is very original for. The segment stories and things like that. I think a lot of that's pretty original. But in a lot of ways, Security Now is like my gold standard. It is what it's the base level that I want to, achieve or mimic. And, Steve Gibson, they don't edit out his ums and uhs. He's a very conversational explainer. And so I do the same. I don't feel a necessity to do a lot of heavy editing because, Steve Gibson gets away with it just because of the density of the information he's getting out there. And I hope that I deliver the same. So in a lot of ways, I'm very much, I copy a lot of Steve Gibson's career. I have to admit, because, the guy is such a hero to me. So there's so much stuff discussed on there. Generally, I will, as far as any like security topic that comes out, I don't always agree with Steve Gibson, but I will often wait to hear what he has to say about it, because he gets into the nitty gritty code of so many things, even more than perhaps I could. And he has a lot of great things to say. And so many of these guys, and we'll talk more about this when we get into the next, our second podcast on this list. There's so many of these guys that have been around. They can really offer such unique perspectives that can only come from experience, and that can only come from seeing, not just from experience, but from seeing the formative years of a lot of this technological development. It is a priceless resource to have and to be able to listen to. I mean, I always feel so lucky that I grew up, in the late 80s and 90s, because I got to hear the really like the attitude that existed before the internet was so prevalent, like the attitudes that existed in other networking systems, like Usenet and IRC, before the World Wide Web was the big deal. I consider that priceless, and I know it's actually priceless because so many people today clearly don't know that, and they're doing things, and they're making what one could describe as amateur mistakes. That if they just had, if they just knew the rules, that a lot of cypherpunks and security guys and computer guys from the past knew already and developed already and had written down. That they could have avoided so much of that. And Security Now is a great way to get that history lesson. It's also a great way to get a lesson on what's going on right now. I consider it the most important, in many ways, the most important podcast in the world, that's still running. There's podcasts that I certainly consider better that aren't running right now. Okay. In one shape or another, one form or another, but Security Now is just so key. It is so key. And I think you can really get a lot out of it. And like I said, they talk about all kinds of things at points, anything that's really tickling Steve Gibson's fancy. And that's why I didn't feel bad. It's like, With Sovryn Tech, I'm bringing such, kind of serious matters, even though I like to have a lot of fun with it. But I want to geek out sometimes. And Steve Gibson will geek out. He'll talk about science fiction and some other things here and there. And so I felt like that was kind of a permission slip, for me to, a social permission slip, I guess, to, for me to be able to go ahead and do that too. And so I've always made sure that that's a part of Sovryn Tech. So check out Security Now. Like I said, I know you might, give it a couple listens, give it a couple shots. And if you really don't get what's going on, okay, that's fine, but I think that there's so much, and Steve Gibson does such a great job of explaining things. And sometimes Leo Laporte will jump in and try and dumb it down a little more if necessary. And it's just today, people need to be aware of what's going on as far as security goes, because otherwise, even with, blockchain technology is so freeing. Look, if you're just handing over the knowledge of blockchain, if you're just handing over what makes society go round and round, which a lot of people want blockchains to make society go round and round, if you don't understand what all that's about, you're just handing it over to the coders. You're replacing one ruling body, that being government, with another, which would be the coders. So it's important to understand this stuff. And, or maybe you need to build up to that point. And if you want to build up to that point, the next best place to go, or the best place to go to build up to where maybe you could get what's happening on Security Now, is our second podcast in this top 8. And that is This Week in Tech. This Week in Tech might be the biggest podcast out there. I might be wrong about that, but by the numbers, it's got to be in the top 5. Like, I can't believe there's anyone doing a podcast that's much bigger. This Week in Tech has been going on, I think in April, it will be 10 years that it's been running. And it is an outcropping, and it's really what the entire Twit network was built around, was the popularity of This Week in Tech. But it is an outcropping of what was once known as Tech TV on cable. This was a channel that I forget who ran it, Ziff Davis or whoever was running Tech TV, but I used to watch it all the time. And there was a popular show on there that Patrick Norton and Leo Laporte would do called The Screensavers, where they would, because Leo Laporte's been doing his radio show, The Tech Guy, forever, where he just, people call in and he gives them tech advice and all this stuff. And that's a fun show too. But This Week in Tech was where he kind of gets all of his friends together. And so he started doing this with Tech TV, where, he'd have people on, guests on the Screensavers, and they would talk about what's going on. And certainly I think technology was a lot more exciting because you had more kind of ground up developments, meaning at the board level. Like right now, most developments are software, and I'm not saying that that's a problem. There's something to be said for getting past the hardware. Okay. But, back then in the 90s in particular, there was still a lot of hardware talk. There was a lot of developments, like there was, including at the software level, there was a lot of kernel development still going on. You had BOS, OS2, Warp, and all this stuff getting developed. The 90s was an incredibly exciting time as far as technology goes. And so a network like Tech TV could really get away with existing. One could argue it still could, because obviously Twit, the Twit network that This Week in Tech is on, is still going strong. So, This Week in Tech, it became an outcropping out of the fact that at one point Tech TV got rebranded into G4, and it became a lifestyle network, kind of a tech geek nerd pop culture lifestyle type network, where Attack of the Show, I think, was probably the largest thing on there. So Leo Laporte went off and he made his own network. He did his own thing, and it's not on cable. It's just something, a podcast network that he made. He didn't originally have video. Originally, it was just all audio. And he'd have his friends on. He'd have John C. Dvorak. He'd have Jerry Purnell, all these kinds of types of guys he'd have on there. And then it kept growing and growing. It was very, very popular. And they would just talk about the tech news of the week once a week. And they'd, say what's going on. And it's an insanely popular show. And it's still the best way, maybe the best way to get mainstream tech news, and to get it explained, and to get a good disparate a bit of viewpoints, get different viewpoints on it there. So This Week in Tech is another just a priceless piece of audio that comes out every week. And when John C. Dvorak's on, I love John C. Dvorak, another hero of mine, another guy I've been reading, since I was a kid, really, like in PC Magazine and others. He comes on, and he's just hilarious. Him and Leo Laporte are best friends, and so he's not on it enough. And ironically, with This Week in Tech, there's people who never want Dvorak on, and then there's people that just are dying to have him on. I'm in the later camp. I want him on every goddamn week. He's so good. Now, he's kind of loosely libertarian. He has some funny economic ideas, and I think he likes the Constitution a little bit. So, that is what it is. But he definitely brings somewhat of a liberty mindset, and he'll call bullshit on things that that the tech industry is doing, that Silicon Valley is doing. And that's a really great thing. And he's another one of those guys that have been around. He's older. He has that experience. He's been there with since, from the beginning of a lot of the personal computer revolution, and all of that. And so that's more priceless insights to get. And it's so funny because they'll have younger guys on, and nothing against the younger guys on, if I went on, I'm 33, I'd be a younger guy on there, I imagine. But it's so funny when they have the younger guys on there, they get so annoyed with Dvorak because he keeps calling all these new developments in Silicon Valley. It's like, look, they're all bullshit. They're all crap. It's like, this stuff's been tried before. It doesn't work, or he'll say, come on, it's like, we did it better here and all this. And usually I think he's right. And he just has a great delivery of humor. It's so good. So Leo Laporte, of course, then just, he's kind of the ringmaster there and just reins everything in. And they talk about stuff, and sometimes I agree with their conclusions. Sometimes I completely disagree with their conclusions. And I've mentioned this before about Sovryn Tech. I really like the fact that it just, I've taken on the role of being the anarchist twit. Twit is short for This Week in Tech, because This Week in Tech comes out on Sundays, which, by the way, Security Now comes out on Tuesdays. But that comes out on Sundays. The Twit network actually doesn't release anything on Saturday. So I like the fact that I'm the Saturday, I like to think of myself as the Saturday show. I'm the anarchist Twit. And there's lots of great shows on the Twit network, though. Tech News Today with Mike Elgin's really good. Tech News Tonight with Megan Maroney's good. I listen to some others. This Week in Google with Jeff Jarvis. I listen to Windows Weekly. I listen to a few shows on there, and they're all pretty good. But at the end of the day, Security Now and This Week in Tech, those two shows alone are probably really great moneymakers. In fact, I think Security Now is the second most popular show on the network, if I'm not mistaken. This Week in Tech, of course, being the most popular. So it's good stuff. And I love the guests that they generally have on. It's always interesting to hear from them. So those are, there's other tech shows that are going to make it in this list, but those are definitely the two podcasts that we started off with the best, because those are the two that I make sure I hear every single week. I don't wait. The instant they come out, I'm listening to them. So anyway, let's get into number 3. And we mentioned John C. Dvorak, so this goes in well. The next one is DH Unplugged. And what DH Unplugged is, D stands for Dvorak and H stands for Horowitz. And that's Andrew Horowitz and John C. Dvorak. And Andrew Horowitz is he's a investor. He's in the financial system, broker. He's actually a broker, I believe. He's not necessarily an investor. He does his own investments, of course. What broker doesn't? But anyway, no matter what they tell you. So this is just the two of them. They talk for like an hour or so. And they're just talking about what's happening in the financial system. And you get such incredible insights because, of course, Dvorak brings in a lot of the tech knowledge and the history of the tech world in doing this. But, in general, you get a lot of insights into what's going on overall. In fact, they were one of the only other people I heard talking about. Now, I don't know if I ever got to talk about this on Sovryn Tech, but I think somebody asked me. I'm pretty sure I did talk about it. But there was the Ebola scare. Okay. And they came up. They also thought about the fact, and it was about maybe a month after I think I ever talked about it, but whatever. But they talked about the fact that, the Ebola scare was actually a way to get out of the tobacco industry. Because, we can get into the science about all that, but essentially, there's some byproducts of the tobacco industry that gets used for the medications for Ebola, or, for the treatments for Ebola, whatever those may be. And that's really what that was all about. That scare was about, was about finance in the tobacco industry. And so there's amazing insights. And these guys aren't necessarily conspiracy theorists, though one could argue Dvorak is, but Horowitz isn't. But they talk about all kinds of stuff, all these, what's going on in Greece. I mean, and it's not technically a political show, but you get this view from the financial world of everything else that's going on. And you end up with a very, you get that, and then you get like these tech shows that I just mentioned, and you get this really well-rounded view of what's happening from those two realms. And, DH Unplugged, it is just that, unplugged. It's, pretty uncensored. They say whatever they want to say. And, of course, Dvorak is always very humorous, and that makes for an enjoyable show. He plays, I don't want to call him the cranky old grandpa, but, he definitely plays the grumpy old man. And my apologies, Dvorak, if I don't want to call you old, but anyway, it was just, it's so good. It's really, really funny to hear. So DH Unplugged is good stuff. Even if you're not, it's also a good way to like start picking up on financial terms, even though I hope that the one thing I hope cryptocurrencies does is just wipes out that whole system, as it exists, just ends it. Okay. But as far as getting insights to what's going on today, yeah, really key to understanding, in my opinion, because you're going to get very unique insights from Andrew and John C. Dvorak. So why don't I go ahead? Let me get the other tech show out of the way that I listen to, as far as getting this good overarching view of what's going on from those perspectives, and that is GigaOm, which is the journalism empire created by Om Malik, who I've had the pleasure of meeting. He's actually a pretty nice guy. And he has what is essentially a podcast network now. It's not as serious as like the podcast networks like 5x5 or Twit, but it's up there. I mean, it does. He has quite a few shows. There's the Chrome Show with Kevin Toffel and some others, and Kevin's a nice guy. But the real gem that GigaOm offers is the Internet of Things show. And this show, it has varying hosts per week, but they talk about whatever's happening in, whatever's getting developed in the Internet of Things space. And shockingly, Twit doesn't have a show specifically for this. I would think it'd be an easy sell, but GigaOm does. And by and large, I mean, it's really interesting to listen to. Granted, I listen to it. When I listen to the Internet of Things show, I am walking in the door with so much skepticism, like I am looking out. All right. I am not listening to this out of enjoyment. I'm listening to it out of some degree of fear. Okay. Because the Internet of Things is just such a bad fucking idea, the way that it's getting implemented and what gets talked about and whatever. But this was the very first place, actually, the Internet of Things show. And one of the reasons that I consider it quintessential listening is because it was the first place that I'd heard anywhere. And please understand, I have my finger on the pulse of the tech world in many ways. And I have my finger on the pulse in the Bitcoin space and the blockchain world and all that. I keep an eye on all this stuff. But the Internet of Things show was the absolute first place months ago where I heard about Adept, which is IBM's blockchain technology. Okay, is the absolute first place. I don't think anybody else even knew what was happening until it got announced there. And the instant I heard about it, obviously I was, more or less terrified. And I guess IBM's working with Ethereum to some degree too. Oh boy. But actually the lead developer of Adept is a woman, and she will be speaking. She's a keynote speaker at the Texas Bitcoin conference this year in 2015. So maybe that's something you want to hear. So I consider the Internet of Things, really quintessential listening as well. That show. And also that's the place where I've heard the quotes of, well, what if you're away? We can just turn your water off for you. And it's like, oh, you can just turn my water off. That's great. I like the idea of that. Anyway, so that, and some people talk about that because I've raised that point before, and they say, well, look, the city can turn off your water anyway, so what the fuck are you worried about? It's like, well, it's a lot different than, a bunch, than some crackers or something, and I mean cracker in as the, malicious version of hacker. Okay. That's racist. Yeah. As a bad actor, not as a white person. And, a cracker could essentially, take over my house. And that all of these, my argument is very simple with Internet of Things, is that it's creating a whole slew of points where, a whole bunch of gateways where I can lose control of my security and of my information. So it's a bad idea any way around it. And so anyway, the Internet of Things show, I listen to that. That's one that, like I said, I don't listen to that out of enjoyment. I listen to that out of, out of absolute fear. So that's an interesting one to keep an eye on. So, and it's kind of ironic too, because oftentimes the female host on there, she's always acting like so happy and cool, and she's so calm and so nice, on the show. But like, I feel like the things that they're talking about are just so like not good that it kind of comes off as creepy when I hear it. So anyway, let's move on to another show. So what are we up to? Number 4. So I want to get away from perhaps more serious subjects, and I want to talk about a show so it's still running. I don't like it as much as I used to. I still hear it because it's someone else's that lives in this home's guilty pleasure. And this show is Puke The Gang. And I end up, whether I want to or not, I hear it every week. And this Puke The Gang, how to describe it? Well, how do you describe a hurricane, right? This is it has the tagline of being the greatest tragedy of all time. And it is certainly that. It is a train wreck of a podcast. It is so terrible. Now let me be clear on what I mean by terrible. The Puke, who is James Schmill, who is a friend of mine. I love Puke, but his nickname's Puke, and so it's him and his friends, and usually they'll have a guest on of some kind. I've been on the show in the past. The lovely and hyper intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy has been on the show many times in the past as well. And it's a lot of fun to be on. Usually they're drinking. They get drunk and they do. Brett Veinotte is on it often, which that might be I might have dropped a hint as to some other show that'll appear on this list. But anyway, Brett Veinotte of the School Sucks. Brett Veinotte of the School Sucks Project. I'm going to leave that in. Is on there often, and it's great when he's on. I will listen when he's on because he is hilarious. He is one of the funniest guys I've ever known, and so is Puke, and that's part of what makes it so good. But anyway, this is just a show where they just talk about whatever. They bullshit about any subject. Usually the guests they have on, and they've had a lot of, if you listen to Liberty podcasts, just about anybody that has a Liberty podcast, by and large, has at one point been on Puke The Gang, and that may be the real. The thing that'll excite a lot of people about it, or at least in the past, it's what I used to enjoy about it, is that it was very much an inside view, because the show used to be based out of Keene. Now it's based out of somewhere else. But it used to be a very inside view, an insider view of what was happening in the activist community in New Hampshire. And it was what was it? There used to be that show with, was the name Brian Daly, or maybe not Brian Daly. Brian Hagan. Brian Hagan? No. This was on the E Entertainment Network. Oh. Yeah, no. No. This was the Talk Soup was the name of the show. I can't remember the names of the guys that used to be on that. Brian Hansen maybe was his name. Anyway, where you just kind of like, I don't even know why I brought that up now.
Puke The Gang, the talk soup.
Yeah, Puke The Gang talks. Yeah. It was kind of that. Like, I mean, just like nonsense news coming out, and you would talk about it, and and they just rip on anybody, that was great too. They'd rip on Ian Freeman. They'd rip on whoever. And when they were in Keene, they also had someone who I just love. I think she's great. They would have Julia on the show. And she's great. When she starts complaining, she's hilarious. Or, she's talking about micro penises or something like that. She's really awesome. So, and she'd talk about sex on the show too. That's the other thing that's missing, is that because now it's just a bunch of guys. It's just a bunch of white guys. And well, Andrew's Jewish, but anyway, that's an age-old debate whether or not Jewish is white. But anyway, it's just a bunch of guys, and like they generally don't talk about, I don't know, they're talking about cars or whatever, but they have, like, Puke has a real comedic quality. Like, he's really quick-witted and very funny, and they use drops, and he's very good with using drops, where a soundbite will come in or whatever. Like, my girlfriend has sucked 37 dicks or something, that'll just come out of nowhere. And it's all very funny. So, but recently, ever since Julia left, I haven't found the show to be as good. And in fact, they must have gotten the feedback a lot, because I'll still hear them say, where like Andrew, who's, the other person who's on the show often enough, Andrew will say very often, it's like, you mean back when Julia was on? So somehow he's gotten that feedback from others as well, that the show was really good when Julia was there. And then it kind of tapered off. I don't know. Anyway, and they do live shows. I've been on they'll do a live show at Liberty Forum, and I've appeared on those as well. And it's so funny. People will just, the bottom of the hotel, because Liberty Forum used to be at the Crown Nashua, and they would, everybody, the studio, the radio equipment would all be set up downstairs by the pool, and everybody would hang out down there. And when Puke and the Gang was on, everybody was lined up. I mean, because it's just such an entertaining, the craziest shit that gets said, the stories that get told, all this stuff. It's really great. So Puke and the Gang, and in some ways it's still kind of an insider because of the guests that they'll have on, because generally it'll be other Liberty people that live in New Hampshire. It's very much an insider view, not just of activism, but of New Hampshire in general. So it can be enjoyable for that. But anytime Brett's on, it's guaranteed gold. And if they ever had Julia on again, which I guess they've tried to reach out to have her on again, and whatever's happened. But, it's good stuff. But you can check it out now. So technically it's still running. I don't listen to it. Like, it was must listen, like a year ago. When Julia was on, it was top drawer stuff. It's still very, very good. I don't mean to insult those guys, but they wouldn't care if I did anyway. So I think they'd just be happy for the press. So, and one thing I tweeted about Puke and the Gang. I will say this, because they are like, as long as, I listen to them, because then I know how low can I set the bar. Like in topics and what gets talked about, because they'll talk about Nazis, they'll talk about anything on there. And so as long as I don't get to that below the bar that they do. And one time I'll admit, I tested that bar. I sent them a very racist song, and I said, look, you guys got to play this. And they wouldn't do it. Like they stopped it halfway. And so I tested that bar. So they do have limits. But anyway, I think I've talked about Puke and the Gang far more than any of the other shows. It's the one I don't even like, totally like. I mean, it's funny. It's a very funny show to listen to. And it's always the zingers that come out, and then sometimes the shows they've monetized their show now. I mean, they've really grown quite a bit. So kudos to them. Kudos to Puke and the Gang. Do check it out if you haven't, but keep in mind, it is pure comedy. Don't expect to be getting a bunch of enlightenment out of listening to it, but I love those guys. So anyway, let's move on. We mentioned Brett Veinotte. Why don't we go there? And this is a show. Now, bear in mind, I'm only talking about shows that are still running, pretty actively, as to where there are other shows that may do what I'm about to, that may have done what I'm about to describe, what School Sucks Project does, which is Brett Veinotte's show. They're not running. Maybe I'll talk about them later. Okay. So there's a hint into the bonus section. So School Sucks Project is very much this is really the, it has a lot going for it. Much like I like Sovryn Tech to do, where it has a whole, covers a gamut of things, and sometimes it has fun and sometimes it's very serious. School Sucks really does cover a broad range, and it is very much the show that forwards. I mean, it's called the School Sucks Project because, of course, Brett Veinotte was a teacher or a substitute teacher, or became what do you call it? Not a teacher. Stephanie, what do you call it? A tutor. Sorry. Yeah, a tutor. He became a tutor at one point, and now he does School Sucks Project full time, and good for him for that, to really like be living off of his podcast. I would love for that, to be able to do that for myself. I think that's fantastic. So, and he delivers a very, well edited, information dense show. And it goes far beyond the school thing. Like that's how it started was in questioning education and all this. But then it eventually, I feel like it kind of morphed into where it started creating a complete liberty picture. And, forwarding these libertarian ideas far more than the Mises Institute or really any other podcast out there, any other podcast that actively runs right now does. It's kind of the last man standing as far as real intellectual debate in the libertarian, anarchist community. In my opinion, it is a phenomenal show. You are going to learn, and when you listen to it, every episode, and he'll do multi-part episodes, which is great. You listen to it. I mean, you're going to learn things. I mean, it's amazing. And especially from a historical bent too, because I think Brett is a fan of history, as am I. And, I'll even, not that anybody can have a complete command of history. I mean, it's impossible. There's so much of it. But I'll learn things about subjects that I thought I really had wrapped up, and so it's a totally invaluable resource to me. It is probably, again, as far as ones that are actively developed, it is probably the best liberty, anarchist podcast out there right now. No, it's not probably. It just is. I mean, it's so good. I really love what Brett has going on, and I'm glad he gets to reap the rewards of what he delivers. So fantastic stuff. School Sucks Project. Again, don't let the name fool you. This is about anarchy en masse, and it does a job. And he has it does the job. He has great guests on often enough, and just fantastic. So I can't really recommend another presently running podcast more. As far as if you're looking for like an introduction or getting into the deeper issues, even of anarchist thought, and what that all means. So anyway, let's move on to what may be the other side. But it is it is without a doubt. Some people may want to say this, well, they're not really anarchists. Okay. And whatever, but this is kind of the other side of the spectrum of anarchy. And that is, there's a show by CrimeThinc. Now CrimeThinc, and that's CrimeThinc, it's think with a C at the end, not a K. CrimeThinc is a relatively old, a couple decades at least, if not a lot more, anarchist collective, group. You did what I wouldn't call, you can't call them a company, that has been putting out printed material about anarchy and all of that for a long time. Now, they are definitely far more of what you would call red and black. They are far, far on that side of, red and black, and that all gets into funny terms, but whatever, they're anarchists. And they have a podcast that they've started. They only started in the past year, and it's called The Ex-Worker. And I think that it is just, it's really a precious podcast, because so much of anarchist podcasts that are out there only come from more the Misesian bent or the capitalist bent. To get one that really is from the complete other side, and to hear those perspectives on feminism, perspectives on like the genuine history of anarchism, from like Proudhon and all of that, is really, I mean, it's priceless. It's precious. It's great. And it's not the most exciting podcast to listen to, like School Sucks. Brett makes sure that it's engaging, I feel, as do many of the other podcasts that I listed off. Ex-Worker is kind of dry. I have to admit it. Kudos to them for having a woman on their podcast. But it is kind of a dry delivery, but the historical perspectives you get from that side of anarchism, from that aspect of anarchism, is just fantastic. And I think you'll have, in my opinion, listening to The Ex-Worker, you will have a leg up on so many other people that consider them anarchists, particularly of the more of the ANCAP bent, or, more of the, people that are in the circles that you'd hear on LRN.FM, or, maybe that you'd even meet people that listen to Sovryn Tech. You're going to have a real leg up on them as far as an understanding of, a lot of these, because a lot of these ideas, they're not new. They're really old. But no one will tell you that. Most people think history started with, with Rothbard, or maybe they'll say Mises, or maybe they'll say Menger, or they'll say the Catholic Church of all things. Believe me, they'll say that. Tom Woods. Whew. So, to get a perspective of where, some very serious anarchist thought comes from, I think that CrimeThinc's resources in general are really interesting to look at. I'm not saying that they're right or that they're perfect or that that's the way to go. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that it is a perspective that is important. And I think that if you can get past, because believe me, they're going to do this really fast to you in anything that CrimeThinc does, including the Ex-Worker podcast, if you can get past the fact that they're bashing capitalism, you're going to hear some ideas and you're going to hear some history that say you are of the capitalist mindset, that you're going to go, whoa, I could implement this here. Okay. It's really, people sell themselves short when they write people off just because they may disagree with some kind of central tenet of yours. Okay, fine. You don't want to spend too much time with it, but you do want to get some idea of what's going on. Especially if they have a very well thought out and sometimes even historical case. I know that appealing to historicity is a logical fallacy. See, I listen to School Sucks Project. So anyway, but still, I think that it is a priceless resource to have out there, the Ex-Worker. And you find out about, because that's the funny thing too, is a lot of people don't realize, there's anarchists all over the place. And okay, yes, they're not of the bent that you're thinking of. They're not from Rothbard school or something. Okay, but they are anarchists. They want just as little government as you do. I don't necessarily know where a lot of this whole notion that, well, if they're red and black, they want to shoot you if you, for whatever reason. Like if you don't believe in communism, we're going to kill you. Honestly, I've met a lot of red and black people. I've met people that are with CrimeThinc, and I've never heard anything of the sort. I've heard them be concerned, about can you blame them? Have you seen some of the things that have happened recently in the ANCAP movement? Can you blame them for being concerned about, what these quote unquote capitalists are going to do? Gold Sculch Chili, anybody? So anyway, regardless, CrimeThinc, I think that there's some really valuable information to be had from there, and this stuff shouldn't just be written off. Okay. Your time is limited, spend it on how you want, but I don't think it should be written off. And I enjoy listening to the Ex-Worker. I get some really valuable perspectives and some valuable insights in history. I really do. I enjoy it. So anyway, now, yeah. Okay. If there's one anarchist podcast I'd recommend listening to, would the Ex-Worker be it? No. I already told you I'd listen to School Sucks or something, but anyway, so let's get on to how many did we do here? Is that 7? Did we already get through 7? Oh, that's pretty good. Okay. Let's get on to the last one. The last one's totally for fun. The last one is something that I just get pure enjoyment out of. I can't really handle sometimes the monologues that this guy gives because he's kind of mainstream. So, you cringe at it. But whatever, it's still good. And that is the Eddie Trunk Show. Now, Eddie Trunk, I've had the pleasure of meeting Eddie Trunk in the past. He's a great guy, just a genuinely nice guy. And he, even though he likes football, Eddie Trunk, he has been in the metal scene, in the radio world. He's a DJ, and he's been doing it for a long, long, long time. He's been around for decades. He's not old, but not that old, but he's been around for decades. And the Eddie Trunk Show is a podcast that he started on the Podcast One network, which gets a bunch of guys like Stone Cold Steve Austin, Jim Ross, Chris Jericho. They're loaded on that network. It's pretty amazing. Maybe I can get on there at some point because they don't mind it being uncensored either, which is pretty great. So, but the cool thing about Eddie Trunk is he gets the metal musicians from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and even the early 90s. And you get to find out what's going on with them, what they're still doing. Because I did 2 metal specials on this show. These guys are still making music. These guys are still doing things. This is their job, and they never get any press in the mainstream. They're not going to be on iHeartRadio. And so, Eddie Trunk is there to, or they're not going to be at the Grammys or whatever. So Eddie Trunk brings them on and, and they talk and they reminisce about like what things were like in the 80s and all of that, or they talk about, like present, because heavy metal is notorious for its feuds, between bands and all this stuff. And you find out some of those feuds, like there's new ones and some still exist, and you kind of get updates on that, which is pretty interesting to hear. He doesn't play any music in the podcast, but you can listen to his radio show, and he's like on Sirius FM and all that. And of course they do That Metal Show on VH1 Classic, which is a wildly popular show. And this is pretty much that's the thing. If you've ever seen That Metal Show, even though he doesn't have the other guys with him, his podcast, The Eddie Trunk Show, is That Metal Show put into podcast form by and large. It's not the same thing, but the style's the same. The format's more or less the same. And so it's really great. I love it. And I listen to it all the time. He has fantastic guests. He had on Michael Sweet from Stryper, which I know I'm an atheist, free thinker, but I still listen to a Christian band. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Well, if you ever heard Against the Law, their album Against the Law, you'd know what I'm talking about. But anyway, actually Michael Sweet just had a new album come out. He worked with George Lynch from Dokken. Fantastic stuff. So, the Eddie Trunk Show, he does monologues where sometimes he talks about sports, and, I couldn't care less about that. But the interviews he does are great. He has a great interview style, very personable style, and he'll do a lot of, because he's so in the metal scene, that he gets a lot of like insights and inside info, and he'll even play, like sometimes he'll play his voicemails that he gets. Like he got a voicemail from Chris Jericho and he played it on air, quote unquote. And it was so cool to hear that. So you kind of get that whole family feel. And that's, that leads me to, now that we've gone over, my top 8 shows I listen to, this kind of gets into like the power of the podcasts. But before which is, well, okay. Yeah. Let me talk a little bit about that, and then I'll talk about it more, which is very much that when these things come out so often, you really get to take in content that matters to you. Now, there's something to be said for getting content that you normally wouldn't put through your personal filter, and the benefit of that. That's largely kind of what I've been talking about here, is listening to shows that may not totally gel with your ideology. Okay. There's an importance in that, but with a lot of these podcasts, you really get to take in people that think very much like you. And so you get a sense of family by listening to podcasts. When I used to listen to Free Talk Live, which is a great podcast, that deserves an honorable mention. I mean, very important in my life. I work for them. So, but when I listen to Free Talk Live, when I used to back in New York, I mean, that was so comforting to know that at least somebody's out there that has these ideals, and especially to hear it, boy, like Free Talk Live, they do it every day, 3 hours a day. That's just an amazing comfort. I mean, you can really, you feel like they're family in a very real sense. Lots of people that I've listened to their podcasts, in many ways, I feel like they're my real family, and that's just to use the word again, it's a precious thing to have. It's a good way to keep up with people, perhaps, that you're friends with. I listen to friends' podcasts and I enjoy it. And it is kind of my way to sort of keep up with them, with, what's going on with them. If I can't just, get in touch with them or go visit them or something, it's a wonderful thing. Podcasts, and in fact, Leo Laporte is famous for saying that audio is an intellectual medium, as to where video is more all about the entertainment and kind of the agenda or whatever. But that audio is the real medium of the intellect. And I think there might be a lot of truth to that. So with that in mind, I want to make the bonus podcasts, the podcasts that aren't really like totally 100% running right now, but have been, were definitely, if they were still hard and heavy going right now, they would have topped my list. They would have beat Security Now easy. They really topped my list. And those two, there's 2 of them I want to mention. The first one is Complete Liberty. By Wes Bertrand, and who I've fortunately been able to become a friend with in recent years. And this podcast, he still releases some stuff, but it's kind of it's a little more infrequent than it's been. But you can go back to the back catalog, because much like School Sucks Project, where it covers does like multi-episode coverings of various subjects, and Wes will often have guests on as well. It's top notch. You can go listen all the way back. I mean, and it's called Complete Liberty because it is just that. It is trying to wrap around. It is trying to deliver a complete package of all these different perhaps ideologies or principles or whatever that it takes to really get that anarchist ideal, or, that anarchist, that complete package of it, of liberty. And, that was one of the first places I heard, that I heard real, nonviolent communication content that we've talked about on Sovereign Tech in the past, along, a slew of all other topics. I mean, it's just amazing what gets covered in that. So do check out that. Again, some episodes are still coming out there, and it's good stuff. But then, of course, the other mention, and I don't think this is going to surprise anybody. Maybe this show will come back one day. But, and you can, clap your hands or click your heels if you believe or something. But Pork Therapy, PORCtherapy.com, run by the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy, a show where I got my podcasting chops, because she kindly had me on quite a few times eventually. And but really, like, Pork Therapy was the show. Like, it's a Free Talk Live, definitely got me introduced into some of these ideas as well. But Pork Therapy, as I've always said, it takes you from, if Free Talk Live is the elementary school, and in many ways, Complete Liberty does the same thing. But Pork Therapy, took you to college. Not to say that college is a good thing, okay, but for the analogy, it really takes you to school. Okay. And, what was interesting about it too, was that Pork Therapy was, in many ways, it was current events. It was talking about stories that would come up, throughout the week, as to where more like School Sucks Project and even Complete Liberty isn't necessarily current events. It's more like addressing the ideas directly. And so I felt like, as much as School Sucks and Complete Liberty do this too, but like Pork Therapy was really that application of these ideas. It was like, okay, you get the ideas, but now let's lay down the arguments and let's lay down the application of what it means to what's happening right now with this news story or that news story or whatever. And there was a lot of other fun things too. In fact, eventually, because the show ended up, it took a couple different formats throughout its run, but eventually became a 3-hour show. It wasn't always 3 hours, was it, Stephanie? Yeah, it was 2 hours and it was right. That's what I remember correctly. It was 2 hours and it was 3 hours. And the third hour kind of became the Sex and Science Hour, which eventually cropped out into becoming the show that Stephanie and I were actually doing, which was the Sex and Science Hour on the Let's Talk Bitcoin network, which at one point was, when it was running, was the second most popular show on that network. So people definitely enjoyed, and we converted a lot of anarchists, I remember, on that show. So, but I can say this, is that Stephanie definitely converted a lot of people completely on her own for years, when she was running Pork Therapy. It is a top-notch show. There's still so much to get from listening to it. She was great about interacting with listeners, like in real time during the show at times. I mean, that can be overbearing, and I'm sure she would talk about that, where it would be too much at times. But she was right on top of it. It was a call-in show. People got to call in. It was good stuff. I mean, it was just, it is, I've said this before on Sovereign Tech, it is the best podcast, I've ever heard. It's the most important to me. I wrote into it, and it very much helped me get my life back in order, get my life changed. So I'm forever thankful to it for that. Okay. And of course, Stephanie for that. But Pork Therapy is amazing. You can still go to the back catalog, and at certain points, you'll even hear from me and in that. But listening to, what Stephanie has to say about these stories, even though some of these stories have come and gone, I think is really, really valuable for a person to get into. So maybe it'll come back one day. And if it does, I'm sure it'll be insanely popular because Stephanie has only grown since. And, and I look forward to that. So there you have it. In the end, I guess I gave you somewhat of a top 10, but it's the top 8 of the ones that are still going, and a couple that that you can check out the back catalog of, and I think you'll really, really get a lot out of it, from the anarchist perspective and, from all kinds of perspectives. So I hope you enjoyed this. I don't want to go any longer with this. This was just meant to be a little fun, letting you know what I listen to, why I listen to it, and actually, if you start listening to some of this stuff, maybe you'll get some inside hints into what's being said on Sovereign Tech at times, because sometimes I'm reacting to what these other shows may say. And, you may not realize that, or I may not present that necessarily, though often I will. I'll admit when someone makes a great point on one of these shows, I'll quote them. I'll quote Mike Elgin. I'll quote Leo Laporte. I'll quote Steve Gibson, and whoever else. So anyway, these are all, just rock solid shows to enjoy. And I hope you if you want to, you get to enjoy them as well. And keep listening to Sovryn Tech too, okay? Carpe Lucem, everybody. I'll see you on the other side.
You just experienced Sovryn Tech. Go to sovryntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.